Alrighty. Hello, Toronto. Welcome to another installment of Tracks from Abroad. This is a video interview I'm doing today with Professor Skye. He's an American professor of French at Brockport State University, and he's an avid YouTube music reviewer. And I found him a few weeks ago reviewing some Haitian music by an artist called Mach Hommy. Our conversation is going to be featured on Tracks from Abroad, episode 11, which is on Haiti. And of course, that's playing on CIUT 89.5 FM, Saturdays at 8 a.m. in Toronto. We're very glad you are listening here with us. So Professor Skye, welcome to Tracks from Abroad.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. And, I think we should also make it clear that this is not just Haitian music, it's more Haitian diaspora music. So I think that's an interesting way to think about it because, Mach Hommy lives in America, grew up in New Jersey. So very much what I find interesting is it is true, it is from abroad, but it's also from America as well. So it's kind of an interesting dual existence.
That's right. That's right. And the way that I found Mach Hommy was through Kaytranada.
Right.
Kaytranada, also a Haitian Canadian. He lives in Montreal and grew up there. But he and his brother Lou Phelps, they're both Haitian and they've worked together sometimes. But recently, Kaytranada came out with a song featuring Mach Hommy. It's called "Pay for Haiti." And that was the first song that got me into their work. And that led me to your review for Pray for Haiti, which is a Mach Hommy project.
Yeah, the project, you got me inspired. I wasn't going to cover the Kaytranada album. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. I wasn't going to cover that EP. And then you said you'd be mentioning it. And I listened to it. And it really is, if you want to understand what's great about Mach Hommy, that's a pretty good example. It's almost everything that makes him so fascinating and so interesting as a figure, especially with having a Haitian Canadian along with a Haitian American working together. When you talk about the power of the diaspora and how it can come together and how it's multilingual, a lot of the ways that I came to study hip hop seriously was through studying French hip hop. And what's interesting is hip hop made by artists from a diaspora like Mach Hommy shares more in common in many ways with French hip hop than it does with American. And that's emphasized the same way with the collaborating with someone from Canada.
Sure thing. All right. Now, Professor Skye, you are a professor of French language and culture. Does that sum it up pretty well? French language and culture. And I'd like to ask, how does Haiti fit into this area of study?
Well, Haiti provided the French Revolution never would have happened if it were not for the money that the French middle class made from slavery. There's just one way that they connect. France and Haiti have a long, bloody history, a long, terrible, bloody history of exploitation and slavery. And the good part of it, if we can say there's any such thing as a good part, is the sharing of language and certain cultural practices, which are not entirely negative. So Haiti is part of the Francophone world, as is Canada, as is America, for that matter. So, French is spoken by many more people than just in France. And so part of my job as a professor is taking the rest of the world seriously and understanding who they are, what's the result of colonization, decolonization, slavery, basically what's the result of the history of the world, which is part of my job to teach.
Sure. Well, exactly. I was about to say, in your review of Mach Hommy's Pray for Haiti, you said studying Haiti is tantamount to learning the history of the entire world, which seems like a pretty large thing to say, but I wonder if you could explain that thinking.
Well, this all basically happened. My brother likes a podcast called Revolutions, which is a good podcast about history. And I started listening to his podcast on Haiti, and it dovetailed with some thoughts. I took a class on Haitian literature and I started to think about it. And the more that I realized that Haiti, and the name of the class I created, is the most important country in the world. And I don't mean that as a joke. I mean that as because the world has to and does deal with American culture all the time, right? American culture, American history. The history of Haiti, in a lot of ways, is the sort of underside of the post-Columbian history, and everything, every way that something went right for an American, everything that something went right for our culture, for our society, something went wrong, and it's a result of slavery, it's a result of racism. And I felt this need, like everybody needs to learn about Haiti. Like it should be in every school, because it completes, especially in America, it completes our picture of what does it mean after the New World was discovered, putting aside questions of the people who are already here, which it also touches on that. I just found this need to share this information. And so I just created a class, and I use that podcast, and I use a lot of books, and we talk about culture. It's not all darkness and sadness. It's also a lot of light and culture. So yeah, I just felt this need to study it, because so much of what we sort of think about with the New World and the projects of the New World, without understanding Haiti, we don't really understand how badly it can go and how much people can be exploited. And just sort of, because there's the revolutions, that's the other aspect, is that the American Revolution and the Haitian Revolution are the two great examples of revolutions in the New World. And every single time Haiti could be undercut and hurt and devastated, it was. And it helps to remind people in more fortunate countries of our luck, as opposed to our divine strength and wisdom, the luck of birth and privilege.
I like that. I like that quite a bit, that sentiment there. And one other thing that I enjoyed this morning, listening to the tail end, maybe it was last night, listening to the tail end of your review of the album, you talked about the voodoo religion, and you had a sort of metaphor, which was that if you took any group of people, disparate people from Africa, but also some French descendants as well, and put them in any certain place, they're going to collaborate and form something that seems rather foreign compared with what we might be used to in America. And the fact is that any group of people would do the same thing. They work with the resources that they're given. And yeah, I mean, what do you think about that voodoo point that you made?
Yeah, it's weird, because we live in this age of political correctness, yet somehow nobody has, and this is very typical, that anything that has to do with the history of Haiti, people just tend to not care about. So we can use the term voodoo to mean 1,000 different things, but it's a religion. It's a thing that people believe in, and we don't just throw out words of religion. We don't just use the word Hindu to mean something that's a joke or funny. We don't get dressed up in Halloween and call it a Hindu outfit, right? I mean, if we did, we would be rightfully criticized. So, voodoo is fascinating, especially when we consider it, like I like to teach at the same time that I teach the Creole language, is that, if we took people, if you took 5 people from Texas, 5 people from, Chicoutimi and Chilliwack and other places in Canada, I'm trying to speak to my audience here, and then we moved them all to the middle of Algeria, or to Mars, and tried to say, okay, you're just going to live here now. Whatever practices and cultures that are happening in Chicoutimi and in Chilliwack and in Texas, there's going to have to be some kind of pairing. There's going to be some kind of group. And really, it's even further than that. It would be like taking people from Algeria and people from Dallas and sending them off to Mars. And so we, and by we I mean the global West, whatever, the slavers took people who had drastically different viewpoints, drastically different languages, drastically different beliefs, put them all together, taught them some other religions and other languages, and they took what they could from everything and mixed it all together. And it's terrible. It's terrible that we still use the word voodoo in that way, of just saying, oh, it's voodoo. It's terrible that people dress up that way for Halloween. And it's not that I'm like, oh, can't you take a joke? It's not a joke. It's not a joke. It might be a joke if people who practiced voodoo haven't been traditionally, castigated and persecuted, but they have been. And it's sort of like the people who are trying to extinguish voodoo are the people who created the conditions for its creation in a lot of ways. Mm-hmm. So I think we need to be a lot more tolerant in that way.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'm going to talk a little bit about your YouTube presence. You sort of call it a hobby, but it seems
Yeah.
you've been doing YouTube videos for 3 years. Is that right?
Yep. About 3.5. Yep.
About 3.5. And here are some quotes for people who have never seen a Professor Skye review. I think they're superb, well
Thank you.
researched, et cetera, et cetera. You should go see them. But here's some quotes from real people on YouTube for this Mach Hommy reviews. For example, as a Haitian, quote, as a Haitian and a hip hop fan, you did a great job. As a Haitian, I say thank you. Haiti is being punished for being free. And lastly, this was one of the greatest YouTube videos I have ever watched. So, can you tell us about your process making these YouTube reviews?
Well, I mean, so a lot of what's interesting is in America and in the world, especially in America, languages are under assault. So in general, less and less classes are being offered, less and less students are interested in being bilingual. This is a great loss for our culture. It is part of what is leading to our culture becoming less tolerant, less understanding, less educated, less worldly, less globalized. All of these things that we should be aspiring to do, we're just not doing. So that's meant that I end up teaching I love teaching language classes, right? Like it's great. I love bonjour, je m'appelle, all this stuff that the Canadians have to learn thanks to the tranquil revolution. Like I love teaching those things. But over time, other classes, I wasn't really getting the chance to teach because there just wasn't that level of interest. So I found myself like needing an outlet because I love talking, I love thinking, I love sharing my research. And so this paired up with a different idea that I had that when you get older, after you graduate college, you just think that all music is terrible. And it just happens. Like it happens to everybody. They just go, unless you really fight against it, everything was better back when. And so I realized, well, that's not true. There's no way that music is worse now than it was when I was a kid. So like I tried to mix those things together. So my process, like you say, very well researched. I actually intentionally don't do a ton of research. The research that I've done is a lifetime of education, being an art history major, being a French major, getting my doctorate, having my eyes and ears open, having a wife who's considerably smarter than me in most areas and will answer a lot of questions for me. It's the research I did all before. So now when I listen to an album, the Belgian singer Stromae just released a song called Hell. It's a great song. It's in French, L'Enfer. And he's talking about the nature of hell. And so, I've already researched French conceptions of hell. I know what he studied. I know he studied Sartre. I think he's having some kind of communication with Sartre and hell being other people, whereas Stromae is saying hell is himself. So like, I don't need to look that up. Like I've been teaching that and learning that for 20 years. So that was very similar with the Mach Hommy video. And I love the response, but it was like, the effort that it took to make that class, and I've only got to teach that class once, and I've never worked on anything harder because I'm not an expert in Haitian history. I was able to reach, 20 students, and that's great. And then I make this video and I've reached like 35,000, and I'm saying all the same stuff. I don't have to dumb things down. And I tell all my colleagues, I tell all professors out there, if you're listening, just jump on YouTube, just share your expertise, even if only because for the first, year and a half, I only had like 200 subscribers and had very low view counts. Even that, it's amazingly edifying to get to share all this education that you were lucky enough to get. Mm-hmm. I don't mean to be too long-winded. I apologize.
Not at all. Not at all. But how many videos do you think you've made in 3 years?
I've made almost 600.
600 videos in 3 years. And I looked back in the very first one was on Eminem's Kamikaze.
Yeah.
So how is your style? Sorry, but how has your style changed since Kamikaze? 600 videos.
Yeah, well, it's changed a lot. So when I started, I was very insecure. So instead of calling myself Professor Skye, I just called myself Skye. I knew from studying, taking the advice. Actually, there's a great YouTuber out of Ontario, Thought Slime, who talked about how to have a successful YouTube channel. At one point, he talked about consistency, and I was like, okay, great. So the main thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to be consistent. So I go to the gym 3 times a week. So I'm like, well, I'll just do 3 videos. I'll listen to 3 albums. I'll do 3 reviews. And in that way, I'll be super consistent. And my viewers will know that I'm doing it because I'm going to the gym. So I started off, my reviews were called Skye's Sweaty Record Reviews, which is really embarrassing. But I was lacking confidence. You have to have so much confidence to do it. I don't know why I didn't just go further. So when they started off, I wanted to be as quick as possible. I wanted to only listen one time. I wanted it to be 5 minutes and under. And the whole idea was that, I'm 40 years old, right? I was 40 years old when it started. And when you're that age, none of your friends want to hear about new music. So I posted stuff on my Facebook feed, because when you're 40 years old, you use Facebook. And I said, hey, I thought this about this new album. I'd get like 1 response or 2 responses. So I was like, I realized I listened to this Eminem album, and I'm not like a huge Eminem fan, but I thought it was interesting. And I thought I had good ideas. And I knew if I said it on Facebook, nobody would care. So that's what got me to jump behind the camera and to get this project going. And that's why there's 600 videos, because it's sort of self-care for me in a certain way, because it's, I have 2 kids and a wife and, a full-time job. So it's like, it's become part of my ritual of like, okay, I go to the gym, I make sure that my body doesn't fall apart, and then I do this hobby that I enjoy. Mm-hmm. And then it's the reaction. I mean, especially in the last year, it's like, it's amazing. It's just so much fun. It's weird. I mean, I'm happy that I've been in a lot of therapy so that it's not affecting my brain, but having success is a lot harder than having failure with YouTube, because you don't know what to do with it.
Interesting. Yeah. Having success and failure on YouTube. Huh. Somebody who has had a tremendous amount of success is Anthony Fantana.
Yes.
And I watched Anthony's videos, and my friends watched them for a long time. But one thing that I noticed, somebody brought this up in your comment section, is that he doesn't get into the history. He doesn't get into the background context so much. It's more so sort of pop culture stuff, or he'll really just focus on the song itself. Yep. And that's a huge difference for you, because you're getting into the language, the history, all this context that you have by being an academic.
Yeah, I mean, I really appreciate what he does. I think that, because there's generally in every area of culture, there's 1 or 2 people who dominate and who are the big voices. And we're very lucky that the big voice is somebody as open-minded and as well thought out as he is. But definitely we do different things. Now, when I started the channel, I'd never heard of him. I'd never watched a single review on YouTube of music ever. Like I'd never done it. I've learned to appreciate his style and what he does, but definitely it's way different. Like the way I think of it is that what he does is he's replaced, like the great music writers, like in Rolling Stone or Spin or Entertainment Weekly. It used to be back in the olden days where a new album would come out and you'd say, okay, what does the reviewer from Entertainment Weekly think of the new Pearl Jam album? And it'd be short, concise, well said, and well reasoned. And what I'm trying to do is more like stumbling on some art, like a chapter in a book. Like I'm really I try to make every single review. I give every review some kind of framing device, some kind of larger theme that I'm trying to attach it to. Sometimes that's personal, but usually it's more historical or more tied into music history. And I try to give it a lot of attention, because that's the other idea behind what I'm trying to do, is that I only do positive reviews. So I don't talk about things I don't like. So the new Justin Bieber came out, and again, I apologize to my Ontario.
Yeah, how dare you? What are you talking about?
And I don't. It wasn't very good. And so I could go on and I could be snarky and say, but like to me, that's what I fear is the level of discourse. Like YouTube provides such an opportunity for high discourse, and some people have to take advantage of that. Now, there's going to be negative people. And if I did negative reviews, I guarantee you I'd get 10 times as many views. I'd get 10 times as much interaction. Even when I'm positive, but I talk about my previous negative attitude towards something, my view count goes up. Even if I'm positive, but I'm saying it in a way which can be misconstrued as negative, my view count goes up. But I really think that we're not loving artists enough. We're not supporting artists enough with all these platforms. So that's another thing that I'll never release a not good, because if it's not good, I just don't talk about it.
Well, from what you're saying, that negativity sells, what does that tell us about the nature of social media and how it affects society, you think?
Yeah, I mean, it's weird because, I'm a victim of it too. I mean, Todd in the Shadows is another great YouTuber who talks about music, and he does these videos about like albums that, like one-hit wonder bands and albums that didn't succeed, that destroyed the career of a certain artist. These are amazingly researched, super well done, but they don't get the same amount of views as when he just says, what are the 10 worst songs of 2021? And even if you give me both those things, what am I going to click on? I'm going to click on the thing. Even Mr. High-minded, Mr. Professor, it's just easier to poop on things. It's easier to think about why things are bad. I do think it speaks to a certain amount of insecurities that we all feel, and that it's easier to feel superior to Justin Bieber, which, that's why people have tried to hate him, because they make him feel bad. You feel bad when you go, well, this guy's super talented and he's really young and everyone likes him. Okay, I better try to destroy him. So I actually don't really think social media is to blame. That's another one of my sort of pet theories, is that people aren't really different. Like, things aren't really different. Like, they take different forms.
Yeah.
And maybe social media is making those things more clear, but I don't think humanity is worse now than it's ever been.
Mm-hmm.
And kind of going back to why to study Haiti. Studying Haiti is also fascinating because every single hero is a villain in Haitian history. Like, every single person who you think is going to be the great hero who's going to save everything turns and becomes bad. And that's true of everybody throughout human history. Like the whole, like, every revolutionary hero of every revolution at some point is bad or is negative. And I think to return to the question of Haiti, I think as a humanist, we need to have that more expansive view and see that, not just understanding that everybody's good, but also understand that everybody's bad. Like, that's also a humanist position where we can forgive each other for our weaknesses.
Mm-hmm.
But sorry, I'm going on a tangent. This is also this is my break, so I haven't started teaching again. So I tend to talk too much when I haven't been teaching. So I apologize.
No, well, let's talk about your teaching a little bit. So, in one of the reviews, you likened whatever song it was that I was watching to Ghostface Killah of the Wu-Tang Clan. And when I think back on the professors I've had, not a lot of them would be able to, talk about Ghostface Killah, the RZA, and any of the members of the Wu-Tang Clan. So, we lost your video you're back.
There we go. Yeah.
That's okay. Not to worry. Anyway, essentially, what did you grow up listening to, and how do you have this sort of unusual knowledge of music?
Well, I mean, I'm the youngest of four brothers. And so when you have four brothers, and when you have three brothers, they're all considerably older than me, and they all liked music. So I learned something different from each of them. So one brother, I learned about rock and roll. Another one, I learned a little bit of alternative music. And then the other one, I learned about hip hop. And, I grew up in the 80s, and like, growing up in the 80s is a very good time for appreciating hip hop, because I got to see the beginning of it becoming mainstreamed. I got to see the golden era of hip hop in the 90s. And then as I sort of aged out of new music, I would say it hit a little bit of a lull sort of in the early 2000s. And that's when I wasn't really paying attention. So I listened to hip hop all the time. I'd listen to it interchangeably with rock and roll and with punk and with all the stuff that I was listening to. It was always just very clearly good music. And now that I'm a professor and I have some sort of say, or I can direct curriculum, I've also come to realize that it's, and this is, something I say on the channel and people often get upset at me. But hip hop is, I believe, the best and most important cultural product in human history. And I can defend that, and I can say it. And yes, I do also mean the Renaissance. I do also mean pop art. I do also mean all these things, because it is always the voice of the voiceless. And because in order to do it, you don't need anything. It's like the difference between soccer and baseball, or soccer and hockey, right? Like, you can just have a ball and play. To make hip hop, all you need is a voice, and that really is it. And as somebody who teaches French and who teaches the Francophone world, like, I can see it. And it's not about race. And people often think it's about race because it's an African-American art. They'll reduce hip hop to being just a question of race. But it's just wherever there are people who don't have a voice in society, they now have a free means of expressing themselves. And I think that's why hip hop has gone way beyond rock and roll, has lasted, like it can't die, I don't think. Now that it exists, I think it will only expand and get better. And ever since I've done this channel, like Wu-Tang and Ghostface Killah, I grew up in the 90s with Jay-Z and Nas and all that, it's way better now. Hip hop is way better now. Like there's so much more going on in the mainstream and in the alternative. It's like the golden era just keeps getting more and more gold. And that's part of what I'm trying to share.
Wow. Yeah. Okay. That point about hip hop being a voice for the voiceless.
Yep.
That's significant. And it takes me to a question which relates to my shirt. Do you know this band, Mdou?
Yes.
Moctar?
Yeah. Afrique Victime. Yeah, I reviewed
Exactly.
that album as well. Yeah.
Oh, you did? Okay. I hadn't seen that. But yes, they have an album called Afrique Victime. And I read this article by what I understand, it was Mr. Moctar. So I think it's one of the members. And of course, he's from Niger, also a French colony and French country, or French-speaking country. And I just wanted to read it's a New York Times article. The title, I don't have the title, but here's some quotes from this article. So this man grew up in Niger, and he says, most of the adults around me worked in the mines. In the 1990s, long before I dreamed of playing music or playing guitar, I remember seeing miners who worked long days and returned home and turned sick. Because of the radiation in the mines, many developed serious medical issues. Furthermore, he goes on to say, today, a lot of the jobs that are available to people in my country are in the mines. They continue to be in the mines, and all of those mines are owned by the French government. And further, in Niger, we speak French, we spend French money, and we work for French companies, supplying our nation's precious metals to France. In some ways, we are a country in name only. And lastly, while the French flag no longer flies in Niger, the ugly truth is that my country remains a resource colony for France because of its mines. You, sir, are a French professor, and I'd like to get your take not only on Niger, but Haiti also being an ex-French colony.
Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit tough because exploitation of Africa is so prevalent in so many cultures that, I mean, definitely France deserves all the criticism that is in there. There's nothing about that that's not true. But, in the last 20 years, China has now started figuring out how to best exploit Africa in ways which are just as exploitative as France ever was. I do think Haiti is a fascinating example because, they were a slave colony and they got freedom. Okay, so we have people who are intentionally undereducated, who have been mistreated, and savage. Sugar harvesting is very brutal and bloody. It's actually much worse than, say, cotton farming in America, as far as like what you actually have to go through. So we have a brutalized, traumatized, undereducated people who managed, even though they all came from disparate cultures, to rise up and defeat a major colonial power. And then after that, the rest of the world didn't want it. So America wouldn't recognize Haiti because they didn't want to annoy France. France did recognize Haiti, but it was only if Haiti paid it back for its own freedom. So that's why Haiti is owed a lot of money. And that's, that song, Pay for Haiti. The world does need to pay for Haiti. Like, we should put Haiti on a universal income. We should, for how much we have benefited from their misery. The entire world. And throughout history, everybody has exploited Haiti because it was a Black republic, because it could be exploited because of racism. And they didn't have, talk about the voice of the voiceless, they didn't have a voice. They didn't have people who would support them. Even things you wouldn't even imagine, right? Like Germany. Like, you're thinking about Germany, like, what does Germany have to do with Haiti? Well, 1910, Germany had controlled 80% of the exports of Haiti. And it was only because there was a rule that you couldn't own property unless you were Haitian. So German sailors would come in, marry Haitian women, and then buy property. So like we have this kind of exploitation, and you don't even think like Germany and Haiti, they don't speak German in Haiti. The English would often raid. America has a very long, very terrible history in Haiti, which could be its whole own interview. So that is the problem. Like, what do you do? How do you actually help? And I hope the first stage is just learning. The first stage is people need to learn. When Mach Hommy says pay for Haiti, it's not like I understand that. It's that we really do have to do something, and something needs to be done, and it is our responsibility. And it doesn't matter if my ancestors weren't the ones cracking the whip in Haiti. My ancestors were definitely benefiting from it. I definitely have benefited indirectly or directly through the misery of all these other people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'll just let that sit for a bit. That is something. All right. Well, I'd like to go back to ask you a little bit about being a professor. I've been in school since I guess I was 4 years old, and the life of a professor is always a little interesting to me, and I like sort of seeing behind the curtain. And so, for example, I was looking you up, and you did a course called Heureux Chocolat: The History of Chocolate in France. And it strikes me that you are no ordinary professor. You take subjects that are not covered so much. You bring, for example, soup joumou into class, which is a Haitian dish, and so you have all of these extracurricular but things that really enrich the learning experience. I wonder if you could talk about your teaching style.
Well, one of the things about language is that it's everything. So when you teach a language or when you learn a language, you can choose to study music, food, culture, commerce, nursing, whatever it is you think is interesting. It exists in that language and in those cultures. So I've just tried to be I really based on a lot on senses, like I guess because I studied Proust when I was in grad school, and the importance of different like sights, sounds, and smells, not just facts. So, when I teach a class on French civilization, I bring in cheeses almost every Friday so that they can actually taste French civilization. And the same thing with the soup joumou, which is this very important soup for Haitian culture, that instead of just learning, okay, and then they were enslaved and killed, and then they killed a bunch of people, and then they had a civil war, and then a bunch of people were killed, at the end of it, it's also this music. It's also this food. So my idea is to try to engage the senses as much as possible. That could be because I studied art history as well, and that's the way that I learned history was through art history. So I have allowed this very kind of visual sense. And so I just try to keep it visual, musical, and whenever I can, I try to offer food. But it's really hard giving very good food to college students because a very small percentage of them really appreciate how good the food is.
I can see that. Yeah, I can see that. Well, let's see. Can you tell us what reviews you might be, what might come out next on your channel?
Well, Stromae just released a song today. And so I'm probably going to do that. You might hear some noise. I've been having some construction in the house, so that's why it's been a little bit noisy. So hopefully I'll find some time to do that. I'm actually very excited. I've been working, you may not know this, but some of the best French rap in the world is being made in Quebec. And there's a producer named Nicholas Craven who's out of Montreal, and he works a lot. He's worked with Mach Hommy. He has an amazing song off of Pray for Haiti. And he's like this amazing producer who manages to have kind of the old Wu-Tang style. But what I've discovered is that there was a golden era for French hip hop in France around, in the 90s and the early 2000s. And in Quebec, that's what they were listening to. Like, they were also listening to American rap, but the connection between Quebec and France is very strong, obviously, and especially culturally. So there are now rap artists, and I'm going to be covering on Thursday, I'm going to be releasing a review of D-Track. He has an album called Hull because he's from Hull. Who would even know that there could be great culture from Hull? I've been there once. I didn't see it as potentially being a place for great culture, but here we have it. There's this amazing album that's a lot about his experiences, and it sounds as close as it can be to a great French hip hop album from 1998, like in its production, in its rapping, in its thematics, and it's all in an accent that is very, very Quebecois. You know, like the French would probably put subtitles on it because they tend to get snooty like that. But that's the kind of thing that this channel has allowed me to do, is that, you know, I go to Montreal. I take my students to Montreal every other year so they can experience a francophone country. And like now, just because of this channel, I've like discovered all this great music and all these great things that are happening up there, which, you know, would be cut off because of language or because of culture barriers. But now I'm going to be doing it. So yeah. What's tough is I'm going to be talking about it in English. So most of the people who want to watch it will not understand it. But, you know, I'm trying to spread the good news of music in other languages to Anglophones as well.
Absolutely. I think I would be remiss if we didn't talk a little bit about Quebec music in general, or Quebec rap, if that's sort of your area.
Yeah.
What is a good introduction to Quebec rap if someone just wanted to listen to something?
I think you should listen to that album I just talking about, Hull by D-Track. It's like, you know, D-track. I mean, thematically, it's a lot like old French hip hop in the way that it's not about crime. It's not even really about himself. It's sort of like a world weary view. The beats are really good. The rhymes are really good. And it's very like vibrant. It's very much like what's happening right now. Mm-hmm. And I'm lucky. He messaged me on Instagram, and I get a lot of messages on Instagram from people like, "Hey, would you review my music?" And I listen to it all, but, you know, I don't have enough time to review it all. And then I listen to it, and it's featuring one of the great French rappers of all time. The reason that I study French hip hop is because I once went to Quebec and bought a tape from a French hip hop group. And that's what got me to study French to the point where I could master it. And then I lived in Marseille, where that group is from. So it's this Quebecois rapper rapping with a Marseillais rapper. And it's like everything that is great about this in a way similar to the Kaytranada collaboration. It's sort of everything that is great about the Francophone heritage, about the connection between language, the positive side of the terrible heritage of colonization is, you know, we can have this shared culture and understanding.
Mm-hmm. What an incredible interview this has been, but what did I expect? You know, talking to a professor of French, he can talk about Quebec and Haiti in the same breath. It's been wonderful. I hope everybody has enjoyed this video on Mach Hommy with, of course, Professor Skye, our music reviewer, and Professor Duo. He can do it all, truly. So I hope you'll look out for more Professor Skye videos and keep up with him. I think your channel is going to grow tremendously as it has of late, but in the next few years, you've really got a nice niche going on, and I'm glad I found you personally. I'm gonna be a fan too.
I appreciate it. And I talk about all kinds of music, not just hip hop. You know, I also talk about rock and electro stuff as well, you know, so it's, if it's good and I have time, I make a video about it. Those are my two criteria. So amazing.
Well, thank you very, very much for coming on Tracks from Abroad and bringing all of your knowledge. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Hey,